Sitting at the kitchen table, I could tell something was off. Her tone wasn't sharp, but there was an edge to it that set me on edge. "We need to talk," she began, and just like that, it felt like the world shifted beneath me. Every book, every article I'd ever read warned that those words never led to anything good. Trying to stay composed, I sat down. She paused, and the silence only made it worse. Finally, she broke it. "I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you, and I want to grow old with you." I nodded, waiting for the inevitable twist. And then there it was. She took a deep breath before saying, "But I've decided I want to take a lover." For a moment, I thought I must have heard her wrong. My brain scrambled to make sense of her words. "A lover," I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. "You mean you love me? You want to stay married? But you also want to sleep with someone else?" She gave me this calm, almost practiced smile. "Yes, but it's not just about sex. This is something I feel I need to experience. I believe our love is strong enough to handle it." "Strong enough to handle it?" I echoed, stunned by what she was saying. My thoughts raced as I asked, "Have you already made plans?" She admitted, without hesitation, that she was considering going away with him the following weekend. Couldn't even find the words. A part of me wanted to shout, demand answers, but another part was frozen, struggling to accept this was actually happening. So, I asked the one question that seemed to matter most at that moment. "If I came to you with this same idea, how would you feel?" She hesitated, her face twisting ever so slightly. Then she said, "I think I could handle it, as long as you promised it wouldn't change how you felt about me." That was a lie, one I could see right through, and I was sure she knew it too. I stared at her, the audacity of it all leaving me speechless. "You'd lose your mind if I even suggested something like this," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. She looked genuinely surprised by my reaction, as if she hadn't anticipated I'd have any issue. "I really thought you'd love me enough to let me do something that's so important to me," she said, frustration creeping into her tone, as though I was the unreasonable one. In that moment, something inside me broke. The woman I'd spent a decade with felt like a stranger. Just thinking about this, planning it, had already crossed a line. And now she expected me to go along with it? "Give me a few days to think about it," I said, not because I needed time to decide, but because I needed time to figure out my next move. I headed to the guest room that night, unable to imagine sleeping beside her. As I grabbed my things, she asked what I was doing. "I can't share a bed with someone who's lying next to me thinking about someone else," I told her, shutting the guest room door behind me. That night, I barely slept. I replayed our conversation over and over, every word cutting deeper. By morning, one thing was painfully clear. If she went through with this, our marriage was over. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling like I hadn't rested at all, and realized I couldn't just sit back and let this play out without knowing everything. Amanda had blindsided me, but I wasn't going to stay in the dark. Grabbing my car keys, I left the house without a word to her. I called into work, told my boss I needed 2 days off for personal reasons, and thankfully he didn't ask any questions. That gave me time to figure out exactly what was happening and what I was going to do about it. My first stop was a store where I picked up 3 voice-activated recorders. They weren't high-tech, but they'd do the job. I placed one near the house phone, another in the bedroom, and the third in her car. After that, I headed to the cell phone provider. Since the phone account was under my name, getting access to her call logs turned out to be easier than I expected. I scrolled through the records, and sure enough, one number stood out, appearing repeatedly over the last few weeks. I didn't need to be a detective to figure out who it probably belonged to. When I got home, Amanda was still at work. I took that as my chance to dig a little deeper. I wasn't proud of it, but at this point, pride wasn't exactly my top concern. I rummaged through her things, driven more by the need for answers than guilt. That's when I stumbled across an email account I had no idea existed. The password? Simple enough to guess. The second I got in, it felt like opening a Pandora's box I could never close again. Email after email, dozens of them between her and some guy named Michael Jones. And they weren't just chatting. These messages laid everything bare. Not only were they planning to meet, but they'd already booked a hotel in Kansas City for the upcoming weekend. Amanda's excitement practically jumped off the screen. She wasn't just looking forward to the physical part. She was fantasizing about dinners, dancing, even shopping for lingerie. Reading through it made my stomach twist. She'd gone into detail about new underwear she bought, specifically for him. The longer I read, the more sick I felt. But mixed with the nausea was something else. Determination. If Amanda thought she could pull this off without facing the consequences, she was about to learn otherwise. I forwarded the entire chain of emails to myself. If the time came to confront her, I wanted undeniable proof in my hands. After that, I set up her account to quietly forward any new messages directly to me. No alerts, no signs anything had been tampered with. That wasn't the end of it. Before the day was over, I installed 2 GPS trackers. One tucked away in her car, the other slipped into her wallet. She never left home without it, so I knew it'd be a reliable way to keep tabs on her. I ran a quick test to make sure both were functioning, allowing me to monitor her in real time. By the time Amanda walked through the door that evening, everything was set. I barely made eye contact with her over dinner. When she asked if I was feeling okay, I just gave a half-hearted shrug. What was I supposed to say? There weren't words for how I felt. Later, when she stepped into the shower, I seized the moment to check her phone. Unlocked. Another careless mistake. Her text conversations with Michael mirrored the emails, just more explicit. She'd even sent him photos of the lingerie, describing how eager she was to see his reaction. A fresh wave of disgust washed over me. But at the same time, I felt a grim sort of validation. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. With the surveillance and tracking in place, I finally sat down and started thinking long-term. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. If Amanda thought she could pull one over on me, she was in for a rude awakening. This wasn't about salvaging the marriage. That ship had sailed. Now it was about preparing for the inevitable fallout. By the next morning, my plan was beginning to take shape. I wasn't about to let her tear down everything we'd built and walk away unscathed. If Amanda wanted to play games, I'd make damn sure she felt the full weight of what was coming. First on the list was finding a lawyer. I'd never thought I'd be in this position, but life has a funny way of flipping the script. That Friday morning, I walked into a law office that came highly recommended. The attorney I sat down with was sharp, one of those no-nonsense types who looked like he thrived on confrontation. I laid it all out for him, every email, text, call log, and tracker update I'd collected over the past 2 days. I didn't leave anything out. I told him about Michael Jones and Amanda's plans for the weekend. He leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed by the sheer amount of evidence. "This makes things fairly straightforward," he said, flipping through the documents. "We can file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, but you'll need solid proof that the affair actually happened. You're off to a great start, though." That was all the encouragement I needed. Before I left, I asked him about the possibility of suing Michael for alienation of affection. The lawyer confirmed it was a viable option, as long as I could gather enough proof. I left that office knowing one thing for sure: this wasn't going to end the way Amanda thought it would. I walked out of the lawyer's office feeling like I had reclaimed a bit of power. Amanda might have thought she was playing this smart, but she hadn't counted on me pushing back. Once I got home, I wasted no time starting to unravel the threads of our shared life. First stop was the bank. I shut down every joint account we had, moving the funds into a new one under my name alone. Next, I canceled all the credit cards tied to both of us, leaving her just enough to get by. This wasn't about being vindictive. It was about survival. If she was determined to torch our life together, I wasn't about to let myself go up in flames along with it. That afternoon, I made a quick stop at a store and picked up a small can of pepper spray. Some might call it petty, but after reading those emails about the lingerie she'd bought just for Michael, I knew exactly how that spray was going to be used. I slipped on a pair of gloves, dug into her suitcase, and carefully removed the offending underwear. With meticulous precision, I sprayed the crotch of her panties and the cups of her bras. Then, I folded everything neatly and put it all back just the way I found it. If she was expecting a steamy weekend, I figured I'd make sure it burned in more ways than one. I wasn't done yet. After that little personal touch, I went online and reserved the exact same hotel room she and Michael had booked for Thursday night. The plan was simple. Get there ahead of them, set up cameras, and catch every moment in crystal clear detail. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. I needed ironclad proof, both for the divorce and the alienation of affection suit against Michael. That evening, I avoided Amanda as much as possible. She tried to make small talk at dinner, but I wasn't in the mood to pretend. I gave her short, clipped answers, acting like my plate held the most riveting conversation of the night. I could see the frustration on her face, but she let it go. I excused myself early, heading to bed, not because I was tired, but because I couldn't stomach sitting across from her any longer. For the next couple of days, I kept a close eye on the GPS trackers and email forwards. They were still planning, still exchanging messages about their weekend getaway, completely unaware I was keeping tabs on everything. Michael had gone all out, even booking them a fancy dinner for Saturday night, followed by dancing. Amanda's response practically glowed with excitement. She told him she couldn't wait, that this would be unforgettable for both of them. Unforgettable? Yeah, I'd make sure of that. By Sunday night, there was no doubt in my mind. There was no turning back. Amanda had made her decision, and I was ready to make mine. Thursday rolled around, bringing with it an eerie sense of finality. Amanda spent the morning humming to herself as she floated around the house, completely oblivious to the storm gathering just beneath her feet. I told her I had to head into work early to catch up on things, but in reality, I drove straight to the hotel. I checked into their room 125, just like their emails had mentioned. Standing there, in the very place they were planning to destroy what was left of our marriage, felt surreal. But I wasn't there to wallow. I was there to work. With steady hands, I installed 2 small fiber optic cameras, carefully angling them to capture every inch of the bed. I tested them, adjusted the placement, and tested again until I was satisfied. By the time I finished, I knew there wouldn't be any room for doubt about what went on in that room. Before leaving, I took one last sweep to make sure the place looked untouched. I locked the door behind me and walked out like I had never been there. The rest of the day, I kept out of sight, knowing Amanda would be heading there soon. I tracked her movements through the GPS pings on my phone. She was on the move. Friday arrived, and with it, the moment of truth. Sitting in front of my laptop, I watched the live feed as Amanda and Michael strolled into the hotel. Michael had her suitcase in hand, and they were laughing like 2 high school kids sneaking off for prom night. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to keep watching. They made their way to the room, and within moments, the cameras flickered to life. There they were, right in front of me, wrapped up in each other, grinning and holding on like they didn't have a care in the world. Michael wasn't exactly what I'd pictured. He was shorter than I thought he'd be. And when the clothes came off, let's just say Amanda had definitely downgraded. I won't lie. There was a cold, twisted satisfaction in watching her face shift as the reality of her choices settled in. Still, they pressed on. Watching it felt like swallowing broken glass, but I forced myself to sit through every second. I needed this for the lawyer. By Saturday, it was obvious things weren't panning out the way they'd imagined. Amanda's frustration practically radiated through the screen. Michael's performance wasn't exactly headline material, and the excitement that had once fueled their little affair was fading fast. She kept glancing at her phone, her expression bouncing between irritation and worry. She tried calling me once. I let it ring, let her stew in the mess she made. That evening, I decided it was time to play my next card. I placed an order for Amanda's favorite pizza and had it delivered straight to their hotel room, right in the middle of their second round. Watching Michael stumble to the door in a bathrobe while Amanda scrambled to pull the sheets over herself was almost worth all the trouble. I laughed out loud when the delivery guy stood there, refusing to leave until Michael forked over the cash. Amanda's face burned with embarrassment, and Michael looked ready to explode. But I wasn't done. A couple of hours later, I doubled down. This time, I sent over one of Amanda's favorite sandwiches, timing it perfectly for maximum impact. When the knock came, Amanda was in the middle of trying to salvage the night. She answered the door herself, cheeks flushing red as she realized exactly what was happening. Holding that sandwich, she pieced it together. There was no hiding now. I knew where they were, what they were doing, and I was watching. Later that night, Amanda perched at the edge of the bed, eyes locked on her phone. Michael tried to slide closer, but she brushed him off. She was done with him, at least for the moment. The tension in that room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I leaned back in my chair, satisfied. Their romantic weekend had officially unraveled. But the real punchline, that was still on its way. Sunday morning, they packed up and prepared to leave. Before heading out, Amanda took a long shower. When she emerged, her skin was bright red, irritated and raw. The pepper spray I'd laced into her lingerie had done its job. She winced as she dressed, visibly miserable, while Michael stood by, offering little more than a half-hearted glance in her direction. Their grand weekend of passion had ended in discomfort, frustration, and utter disappointment. I made sure to be nearby when they pulled into the driveway later that afternoon. Sitting in my car, parked just up the street, I watched as Amanda stepped out, hugged Michael half-heartedly, and yanked her suitcase from his trunk. As they drove by, she caught sight of me. Amanda tossed me this smug little smirk, like she had something to be proud of. I lifted my hand and gave her a long, slow middle finger. Her smile dropped instantly. I kept it there until she disappeared into the house. The front door creaked open, and the wheels of her suitcase echoed down the hallway, cutting right through the football game I had on. She stood there, lingering like she was waiting for me to acknowledge her. I didn't. Finally, she cleared her throat. "I'm home." I didn't look up. "Good for you," I muttered, eyes fixed on the TV. I wasn't about to make this easy. She stepped between me and the screen, desperate for attention. "Aren't you even going to ask how my weekend was?" she asked, feigning some chipper tone that made my skin crawl. That was it. I turned, locking eyes with her for the first time since she walked in. "No, Amanda. I don't give a damn how your weekend was. You've made it pretty damn clear where I stand in your life." Her smile faltered, but she tried to rally. "Look, I know you're upset, but I've thought about it, and I made a mistake. I want to fix this. I want us to move forward. Move past it." I echoed, rising to my feet. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, but I swallowed it down, keeping my voice steady. "Amanda, this wasn't just a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to grab milk at the store. What you did, you planned this. You lied. You schemed. And after I begged you not to, you still spent the entire weekend with him. And now you think we can just brush this under the rug? Pretend like none of it happened." Tears welled up in Amanda's eyes, but I wasn't falling for it. "I didn't think it would hurt you this much," she sobbed. "I thought you'd understand. I thought our love was strong enough." I cut her off, my voice sharp. "Our love? Amanda, love doesn't mean sleeping with someone else and expecting me to be okay with it. Love isn't built on lies and sneaking around. What you did, that wasn't love. It was selfishness." She reached for me, but I took a step back. "Don't," I said, my tone ice cold. "Don't touch me." Her hands hovered in the air, trembling. "I'll do anything," she pleaded. "I'll prove to you that I made a mistake, that I can be the wife you deserve." A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "The wife I deserve? Amanda, the wife I deserved wouldn't have done this in the first place." I walked to the kitchen table, where a manila envelope had been sitting since the night before. I picked it up and held it out to her. Her fingers hesitated as she took it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Divorce papers," I said flatly. "I filed them on Friday. You'll notice the grounds are adultery. And if you keep flipping, you'll see I'm also suing Michael for alienation of affection." Her eyes widened as she rifled through the documents, the weight of each word hitting her like a hammer. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice cracking. I met her gaze without flinching. "Oh, I'm very serious. I warned you there'd be consequences. You didn't believe me. Now you get to live with them." The papers slipped from her fingers onto the table as the sobs returned, louder this time. "You don't have to do this," she cried. "I love you. We can fix this." "No, Amanda," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "You broke this, not me. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." I brushed past her, heading for the guest room where I'd been sleeping. As I reached the doorway, I paused and glanced back. "You can sleep in the guest room tonight," I told her. "I'll be in the master bedroom. And don't even think about touching me. You're not my wife anymore, Amanda. You're just someone I used to care about." I shut the door behind me and locked it. Leaning against the wood, I could hear her sobbing softly on the other side. For the first time in days, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But this felt like the first real step toward the end. And I was ready for it. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained, like I hadn't slept at all. The decision was made, but the weight of it still hung over me. Downstairs, I could hear Amanda moving around in the kitchen, probably trying to cling to some semblance of normal. But nothing about this was normal anymore. It never would be again. I got dressed and went down to sit at the table. She hovered near the stove, making herself breakfast, occasionally glancing in my direction as if searching for the right words. I didn't give her the chance. "Amanda," I said, cutting through the silence, "I'm not interested in playing house. Eat your breakfast, go to work, and let's keep this civil. That's the best you can hope for right now." She nodded quietly, her face pale and puffy from crying. As she gathered her things to leave, she lingered at the door. "I still love you, you know," she said softly, watching me over her shoulder. I didn't look up from my coffee. "I loved you too," I replied, the finality of the past tense hanging between us like a blade. Her lips parted as if to say something more, but she thought better of it. She walked out without another word. As soon as she was gone, I got to work. I started packing her belongings, going room by room, separating her things from mine with cold efficiency. It felt oddly therapeutic, like reclaiming space that had been taken from me piece by piece. By the time afternoon rolled around, her clothes, toiletries, and whatever else I could find were packed neatly in black garbage bags, stacked by the front door. This wasn't about being vindictive. I just needed the reminders of her to be gone. Then, I made the call I'd been waiting to place all weekend. When Michael's wife answered, her voice sounded polite but distracted. "Hello," cleared my throat. "Hi, my name is Jason. I'm Amanda's husband. Do you know where your husband was this weekend?" There was a pause. "He said he was on a business trip," she replied cautiously. "Why?" I tightened my grip on the phone. "He wasn't on a business trip. He spent the weekend with my wife." The line went quiet. "What?" she finally said, barely able to process the words. I told her everything. I didn't hold back, laying out every painful detail and offering her all the proof I had gathered. There was a long silence on the other end before she finally spoke. "I'd like to see it." An hour later, I stood at her doorstep, the envelope of evidence tucked under my arm. When she opened the door, I had to catch myself. She was stunning, composed and graceful, with an elegance that made it painfully clear Michael had been reaching far beyond his worth. I handed her the envelope, carefully explaining everything I'd uncovered. She listened without interruption, flipping through the photos and reading the emails with a steady, unwavering focus. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm but sharp, like the edge of a knife. "Thank you," she said simply. "Michael will regret this." Before I turned to leave, she met my eyes. "I hope you find peace after all this." I nodded, offering a faint smile. "You too." Back home, I dropped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, the house unnervingly silent. Amanda's suitcase still sat by the front door, her packed belongings a reminder that the next chapter was already in motion. Not long after, I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. When she walked in and caught sight of the bags, she froze. Her voice trembled. What's all this?" I didn't look up. "It's your stuff," I said plainly. "Take it and go." You've got until the end of the day to figure out where you're staying. Tears welled in her eyes as she stumbled forward. Jason, please, I don't have anywhere to go. Let's talk about this. I met her gaze, unflinching. You made your choices, Amanda. Now live with them. She wept as she carried the bags out to her car, loading them one by one with shaky hands. Before she left, she lingered in the doorway, hesitating for a long moment. I really did love you, she whispered. I exhaled slowly, feeling the last thread of attachment dissolve. I really did love you too, but not anymore. She gave a faint nod and stepped outside, the door closing behind her with a dull finality. That night, the house felt different. Quiet, but not empty. The ache was still there, but alongside it was something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't bound to her betrayal. I was free to start over, to rebuild without the weight of her decisions dragging me down. As I sat there, my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up to find a message from Michael's wife. Thank you for telling me. I filed for divorce today. A small, almost involuntary smile crept across my face. The woman who had helped shatter my marriage was now watching her own fall apart. And her partner in crime was right there with her. I deleted the text, powered down my phone, and poured myself a drink. The road ahead wouldn't be simple. I knew there would be hard days and long nights, but for the first time in a long while, the path forward felt like mine to walk on my own terms.